All right. So I've got a couple little samples from last year that I just made as things to play around with, and I just want to run you through a couple of the steps that we can do to sort of make the best use out of these resources that we've made downstairs. If you're like me, then probably your photo of your sketches and your bits and pieces will look a little bit like this, which is to say that it's covered in crap. That's okay. There's two, I don't know how many, I won't list them off. There's a few reasons why we might want to clean this up, and the main reason we want to clean it up is to do this really effectively. We want a nice, clear, high contrast black and white to work with, or we want a nice, clear black and white that maybe has some nice gradation in it. So, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change to Photoshop, and I'm going to make it black and white. So you guys don't have to follow along while I'm doing this. Maybe just pay attention to the screen, and then when you get a chance, you can either come back to the video or you can use your incredible memory powers, because I think it'll be easier and it'll be quicker for all of us if we do it that way. So I'm going to make this image black and white. A couple of different ways we can make it black and white, but I'm just going to use the quick way, which is just straight black and white conversion. All right. Now that looks a little bit better, but as you can see, there's still quite a bit of texture in that photo, and that's going to get in the way if I try and live trace this image or try and do anything within Photoshop as well. So what I want to do is I want to take the bits of the image that are grey and make them white, and the bits of the image that are black, make it blacker. Does that make sense? So I want to knock out that. Now, Photoshop's got stacks of different ways to do this, and some of you guys hopefully will remember some of this stuff from last year, but I'm just going to try and just give you a quick refresher as we go, just to make sure that you're kind of comfortable with that. So the first tip I would give you with this is crop it down to the size of the bit that you want to work on. Because especially, hang on, don't crop, this stuff over here on the edge, that's going to actually make our adjustments more difficult. So if we only work with the bit that we want to adjust, which is, let's say, this bit here, it's going to make my life easier. So I'm going to crop that. Now, there's a bunch of different ways, so I'm just going to show you a few different. There's an easy way that never really works that well, but I'll show you. So in our image adjustments, we can have a look at our levels. Now, one thing I haven't told you guys, which I probably will now, is I use the shortcut keys for everything, and so one thing I always find difficult is remembering where stuff lives in the menus anymore. So occasionally I will vague out when I'm in the menus. So what we can do is we've got this histogram here, this little drawing here, this chart. That's our histogram, and it tells me where all the colour is in this image, right? And what levels do is it allows us to adjust where those colours start and stop. Now, there's a couple of different ways we can do it. We can start by we can drag these sliders, and as I compress the histogram on that end, see how it's making the grey into black? Can you see that? So I'll zoom in a little bit for you. Whoa, whoa, whoa. You see what's happening there? This actually can be really useful. I've taken photos of just like pieces of blank paper with decent light, and then use this to get the texture out of the paper for other Photoshop stuff. So adding, like picking up the grain can be useful. In this case, I want to get rid of the grain of that paper because it's actually going to be a pain in the butt. So if we drag it from the other side, can you see how the lighter colours, those greys, are disappearing? There's another way, which is these little guys here. Those of you who've done photography, you would know what your white point is, and a mid-grey, and a black is. What this does is it allows us to set the white point. So I can click on this, and I'll click on the bit of this dirty grey colour, and it says to Photoshop, hey, that's now the white point. But you can see down the bottom of here, it hasn't actually effectively dealt with it. So levels can be really useful. I find that I don't have enough control in the levels area, so I generally don't use the levels to do these kind of adjustments. There's another area, before I show you what we'll be focused on, which is just if we do our brightness contrast adjustments. Now, the problem with this is I don't have the kind of control that I really need. So this is the brightness contrast adjustment. So image, my adjustments, brightness contrast. So I can bump up the brightness. But again, I'm not really, even if I kind of max out the settings, I'm not really getting the kind of control I want over this. So this might be useful. See how this has got shades of grey in it? That could be useful for Photoshop stuff. Shades of grey in an image when we're using this sort of stuff can be really useful for Photoshop. If I'm planning to live trace it, which is what I'm going to do with this one, then I'm going to want some nice solid black and white. I will show you one where we do shades of grey later. All right, so also, like in Photoshop, there's always a million ways to skin a cat. The way that most of us do our image adjustments and our retouching is using the curves. So you got your curves, they live under here. So the thing about the curves is they give you much more control over your image. So the best thing about our curves is we can make adjustments to every single channel. So I'm just going to swap, I'll just open this one for a second. And I'll have a look in the curves. And if I go and grab, let's say for example, the green curve and pull that down, see how the image casts magenta? And if I pull that down, it casts green. So the curves give me control over each channel in the image. Now that is rad because if I've opened up an image and this image is way too yellow, because we'll just pretend that the yellow in the background is a bit of an issue, I'm in RGB mode. Now I can make adjustments to my red layer and kind of faff around a little bit and try and pull it out that way. That's going to suck. Or I can change my image mode to CMYK, go back into my curves, and now I've got a yellow channel. And I can pull my yellow channel down without affecting the other channels. Well, it will affect them a bit because the colours are all blended together. But did you see how easy it was for me to pull a yellow cast out of that image? Now, for those of you who've got a photography background, you go, but once you change it to CMYK, you've lost a bit of colour. And that's true, you do. But if you're planning to print it anyway, then at some point in time, a CMYK conversion is going to happen. So that's one reason why the curves is great. The other reason why the curves was great was, remember how I showed you when we were doing a layers a levels adjustment, how I couldn't quite get the bits I wanted, and I couldn't quite target the areas I wanted when I used a brightness contrast adjustment. When I've got my curves up, not only can I edit it per channel, but I can also sculpt what happens. So what I could do is I could do this, and this looks pretty similar to what we had before. See how we've got this grayscale thing going on? Because I've just pulled the curve in one direction. But what I can do with the curves tool is I can then put a little sort of S-bend in it. And so now not only have I got rid of most of my white color in the background, I've got a really strong black to work with in Illustrator. I'll just do that again because I think it's really important. So image menu, image adjustment curves. And if I just try and just grab this line, you can see that it does it to everything. But I don't want to do it to everything. I only want to adjust the dark stuff in one way. So I want to make the dark bits darker and I want to make the lighter bits lighter. I want those grey bits to disappear. And so that's why the curves is so great, because it gives us control over that. I can see, sorry, I'll have to, whoops. When I'm over, so I've currently got my cursor over my image here, and as I'm clicking around this grey area, it's highlighting where I'm clicking. It's actually telling me what these little spikes in the histogram mean. It's telling me where that colour is. So that's useful because it means that when I open this up, I go, okay, well, I've got to adjust this end of the image here and then this end of the image here, because I can see in the histogram where the colour is. That's something that I don't expect you to remember because it's kind of boring and weird, but eventually that will become a very useful fact for you guys to know. if you are interested in doing really pro-level Photoshop work, you're going to spend heaps of time working with curves. So what I want to do is I want to finish up my adjustment. So I've got my black nice and black, and I'll blow out as much of that white as possible so it's not going to interfere. What I want to get to is something like that. So you can see, if I'll save the copy. Just get this window under control. Whoops. So you can see how much crap we cut out of that. Can you see why that would be useful? Because we know, I think has everyone been exposed to the Live Trace tool in Illustrator? Is anyone sort of a little bit uncomfortable with it? I'm still going to run through it, but I'm just trying to get a sense of where everyone's at. Okay. So if you are planning to live trace anything, my best tip for you is try and draw it on something that's in as high contrast as possible. So I will use a black pen on white paper. I'll use black ink. I use gouache all the time because I like it because it's really high contrast. If you're planning to do other Photoshop things, which we'll get onto later, then it might not be as mission critical. All right, so we've got this now. So what can we do with it? So we'll head on over to Illustrator, make a new document. I'm going to place it in. I could select this and go paste into Illustrator. I'm not going to do that, and there's a couple of reasons why. One of which is I've actually disabled that functionality in my Illustrator because it's crap. So it won't actually happen here anyway. But secondly, if we do that and we copy and paste stuff into Illustrator, what we're doing is we're not linking, we're embedding the file. Does anyone know the difference between linking and embedding files? Gareth, you want to shout it out? I saw a nod.
Well, linking is like two files together. So you edit, you have a Photoshop file in Illustrator, you edit the Photoshop file, we change it.
Spot on. So we're linking to an external file, we change that file, and whatever other things it's linked into, we'll just update next time we open it. Versus embedding, which is?
Which is just putting it in the file. So
yep.
It's basically the same.
That's right. It makes a separate copy, puts that in that file, and then it's like a little island. And it's a pain in the bum. So we always want to link stuff. It's the same as, and so we use, in Illustrator we call it placing, in InDesign we call it linking. Okay? So what I want to do is I'm going to place this in. So I'm going to grab my thing. Now, under our image trace, it will generally ping up a little bit of warning about if you've got something that's relatively decent size. What would be a downside to having zillions and zillions of points in a piece of artwork? Lots of points in your vector artwork. Yeah, so it'll take a little while to trace, but what else might it do? That's right. So what we want is we want the least amount of dots or points and lines in our artwork as we can, because it's going to be faster to work on. And you will know because if you've done something with heaps of points and lines and then just Illustrator poos its pants because it can't deal with all the stuff you've got in your artwork. So we're always trading off between how many points we need in the thing to make it look good. Does that make sense? So if you next time you see it like a screen printed t-shirt or something like that, have a little look at the quality of the line. Often if they've kind of done a brushy thing, you'll notice that the little fine points come down to triangles. It's because they've tried to balance out that difference between how fine they needed to go. I've got some logos that I've done for clients where the original was a gouache and brush. And so I've had to balance out the amount of information I wanted to include versus how much it would slow down my file, because it wouldn't be unusual for me to have a logo in a document many times, wouldn't it? And each time we put that document in our file, things get a little bit harder for the computer. So it adds up quickly. So when you see this warning, you don't have to then go, I'll cancel and I'll make the image smaller. You just need to make some adjustments on the fly to how you're going to trace it. So we're going to have a look at tracing options. So try and get us so that we're in. Oops. See whether we can get a happy medium. How's that work on screen? That work okay for you guys? All right. So number one, we turn on our advanced options because we are now advanced graphic designers who know everything about the universe. And that's I'm not being mean. That's just about having access to all the tools, right? So the advanced settings are where all the good stuff hides in here. My number one tip for you is always tick ignore white. Because if I ignore the white on this, I'm not going to have to then delete the white later because I only want this black line work, right? So if you ever live trace something and then you've got to go through and then clean up all the little bits of white in it, you tick that option and that's gone. The only thing is it doesn't remember that setting, so you've got to do it each time. It's kind of a pain, but that's okay. Now, you need to have a look at this information down here. Paths, 322. Anchors, 2,789. That's actually not heaps. Like 3,000 anchors is not the end of the world. You're getting up into 8,000, 10,000. Things start to get a little bit slow. If you've live traced something that's got 20,000 points in it, life is going to get pretty difficult for you. But if I zoom back out a little bit, I can also make some adjustments to the way in which I'm tracing this. Sorry, I haven't been using my screen zoom over the holidays and I've forgotten what a pain in the butt it is to use. So we can make some adjustments to the quality of our trace. Most of these you will have hopefully been exposed to, but if you haven't been using advanced section, I might just quickly run you through that. So you would have seen the threshold less is less and more. So as I drag up more, you'll find that it gets darker. As I go less, my line work will start to look thinner. Do you see the difference between there and there? Now, if I hadn't decrapped my image and removed all that stuff from the outside, so actually I can show you what that looks like. So let's just place in the original before that it's been adjusted. 8629. There's the original. Now, if I was to image trace this, firstly there'll be a lot of points. It's actually traced pretty good, to be honest. But there's going to be a whole bunch of crap that comes in there that I don't want. And also, I'm not going to have the same control over my threshold because if I want to make it a little bit heavier, all of a sudden all that paper texture that we removed in Photoshop starts to come into play. If I've removed that out, then I have control, like I do with this one, where I can make it thinner or heavier, depending on what I'm trying to achieve, because I've cleaned it up in Photoshop first. Make sense? Cool. So that's the difference between our untidied up and that's our tidied up version. This has also got nearly 13,000 anchors in it, so we can get rid of that. All right. In a lot of ways, when you're doing this, the best way to do this is to practice it and to try it a bunch of times, because I'll sort of make instinctive changes, but sometimes I'll be fiddling around with the sliders until I get what I'm looking for. Generally, I care more about how it looks than the amount of points up until a certain point, and then things become a bit of an issue. But I can bump down the number of paths, and you can watch the simplicity drop on the left-hand side. So watch as I drop down and see how kind of basic that gets. And my anchors went down to just over 2,000, whereas if I bump it up, my anchors are up to 8,000. So if I want to speed up a piece of artwork and make it faster to work on, and I don't mind losing a little bit of quality, by pulling down the amount of paths, my artwork's going to be heaps quicker to work on, right? Same with the corners. So that's less, that's more, somewhere in the middle. Noise is a really important setting. So, you know those little speckly dots and bits and pieces that you can see on here? I can adjust the noise setting and it'll automatically get rid of a bunch of those. So if I make the noise setting up to 100, a whole bunch of those dots are going to start to disappear, as you just saw. Or if I bring it down the other way, a whole bunch of them are going to appear. Because my artwork was nice and clean and I tied it up in Photoshop, I've got access to everything that Illustrator can give me here. So let's go somewhere in the middle and we'll call that that. So at the moment, this artwork is a photo with the live trace filter applied. It's done all the maths, but it's not expanded. When it's not expanded, I can't actually do much with this. So at this point in time, and especially if the file size is not too huge, it's a good idea to pop a copy of this one over to the side, because if at some point later I go, you know what, I just want the threshold, I want it to be a little bit skinnier, I've got that one there. Because the minute I expand it, which is what I'm about to do here, so I can either click on the expand button here, or I can go up to the object menu and go to expand, which lives here. I'm just going to expand the object. The minute I go expand, I can start doing stuff with this artwork, like colouring it in, but I can no longer change any of these image trace settings because I've now converted it. So who remembers converting type to outlines? Is everyone comfortable with that idea? Is anyone not comfortable with that idea? There's no, not comfortable? Yeah, cool. So it's the same as if I go, hey, my dudes, this is live editable type right now, and so I can make any changes I need to my type, including changing the font from something less gross, say to something less gross. Right, what else? But what if I wanted to edit some points in this type? What if I wanted to bring in part of this E? I can't do that because I don't have access to the individual vectors. So what I can do, object menu, expand, or I can just go type, create outlines, and now I've got outlines of my type. I can start fiddling around. So if I'm designing a logo, it wouldn't be unusual for me to start messing around with some of the vectors on the type to start to customize that a bit. But same thing that applies to our live traced images before. I can't edit this type anymore. I can't just click in there and change the words or change the fonts because it's been created into outlines. So if I was planning to do something like this, same thing would apply. I'd actually just make a copy and just drag it off the artboard just so I've got the font settings just sitting there. And then I make my outline version, and then I start mucking around with my individual points and doing whatever I want to do. Easy peas. Does that make sense? Cool. All right. So if you can, just making a copy off the edge of your artboard before you expand that is not a bad idea. What you will want to do is you just want to be careful because you don't want millions of these with heaps and heaps of points in them because your document will start to slow down. So there's a limit to that. Understand what I mean? So if you, same thing is you've got lots of points, lots of copies, Illustrator starts to have a sad time. All right, so this is usable for a bunch of stuff now. There's a whole bunch of things we can do with this that we couldn't do with it before. So, I mean, we can treat it as a normal Illustrator file. We can go into Prints Pair mode. And we can do multiplication, we can do normal vector editing, do whatever we want with that file now. So Give me an example of why taking a sketch and converting it to vectors would be a really good idea. Holla. Yep, so you need to convert your logo into vectors. Why do our logos need to be in vectors?
So the scale.
That's right. So they're scalable. So, being able to convert our sketches and things into workable art works great. But then we can also, like, this thing's not an island too. So we've got this in here, and I might choose a font that might work. So I'll go into my suitcase. Algorithm will do that. Go. And we can start kind of comping stuff up together, or we could color it in a less stupid way. And if I chose something like a really heavyweight, like the black version, and squished it up a bit, and had it run into there. Might get rid of that vector schmoo and put it there, I don't know. And we're starting to like combine type and image really effectively and really easily. There's a stack of other stuff we can do, but I'm trying to keep this not too boring so you don't die of boredom. So before I move on, is there any questions about that? That won't be covered in a rewatch of the video that I'm making for you dudes. Okay, so there's something else we can do with this that's really, I hate to say like kind of like words like exciting in references because you're not, I know that you're not pumped about it right now, but I promise eventually it will be exciting to you. This is paths. So I can copy this. I can go to Photoshop. I could open up this image. I could paste it in as a path. I can now transform this. And match it up to the picture, which will take me a second because if I'd kept this all on the same angle, that would have been better, but that's okay. I'll just pop it in there. What do we use paths for in Photoshop? Making selections. Paths is how we make selections in Photoshop. Paths is how professionals make selections in Photoshop. You are not going to be using the magic wand tool. That's some bush league nonsense. I'll show you how to do it properly later. But for now, I can then bring this in. I can overlay that, and I can start using that however I want in Photoshop to add a dimension to the artwork that just wouldn't have been possible otherwise. Those paths are completely editable. So I've got these paths here in my paths palette. So I can use them for making a selection, but I can also use them for comping up artwork and building up some pretty complicated stuff really quickly. Which leads us neatly into the next bit. This guy here. Looks kind of like a whale, and so we're thinking that it would be kind of good to make a selection out of him. So one way I could make a selection out of him, which is the proper way, which is to get the pen tool out and trace around him, which is what I'm going to do. I'll do a real quick one though, because we don't have half an hour for me to get right down into the nitty-gritty of things. I'll keep that one, but ditch the other one. So I'm just using the pen tool to trace around him. I'll do a proper lecture on this later, so you don't have to stress too much, but I'm just using the pen tool. Same way as I use the pen tool in Illustrator, except this time I'm using it to draw a path so I can make a selection. That will, you know what, I'll keep, I kind of don't mind that stuff around the tail, so I'll keep that too. I've got my path here. I can load a selection from this. So if I hold down the Command key on my keyboard, when I click on this path, if I don't have the Command key held down, it just turns into a little arrow. Hold down the Command key, see how the little marquee symbol comes up? What that's going to do is it's going to load that selection for me. So I will now zoom out. Did you see how I'll just deselect? So there's my path there. Hold down that and all of a sudden my marching ants appeared on screen. So I'll just zoom in a bit so you can. So now I've got my selection loaded of this guy here. Now I can grab him, paste him on a new layer, and I've got him separated away from the background. I can do a really quick curves adjustment now. So I might hop into my curves. I might go, well, I'm going to pull down my yellow, just like I showed you before, where I'm like, I want a little bit less yellow in here. And he kind of looks cool now. He kind of looks a bit whalish. I can go back into Illustrator. I can grab this guy here that we made before, and I'll just make it white. Go back to Photoshop, paste it in. Just a little thing. See this add to my current library? See how it's turned off? When you guys paste stuff in here, I strongly recommend you turn off add to my library. The reason I strongly recommend it is you guys are all under one Creative Suite license, which means every time you guys add something to the library, it then uploads it and then downloads it to however many Macs are in under this license and all the ones in there. So just don't tick. I think it just times out anyway. I think it just makes it you're pasting. So if you're finding you're copying and pasting stuff from Illustrator and it slows things right down, untick add to my current library. And you'll notice even though, so this I'm working on my Mac here, it's unticked on mine as well because I don't actually, most of the time I'm working by myself, I don't need to add it to some online library for something I'm going to use once. Does that make sense? Cool. So I'm going to paste this in as a smart object. What's the difference between a smart object and pasting it in as pixels? Yep. So I'll just repeat that for the thing, for the tiny people that live inside my computer. Patrick says that when we paste it in as a smart object, we keep our vectors. He's 100% right. So if I keep it as vector, and then I have to resize this artwork or do something with it later, that data's already there. It's heaps easier. So I can paste it in, make it a kind of reasonable size, sort out my zoom level, just rearrange it. I resize the pasteboard a bit as well, so I've got some more room to kind of play around. I'll have a look in the folder. So we made a few different textures for this class last year, so I've got a few that I had on file. So I can just grab that and paste that in. There's a bunch of different ways I can recolor stuff. The one that you guys are probably most used to being exposed to is just making a new layer, filling it with a color, and then changing the blending mode of that to color. Haven't done much of that. I'll just stop for a second and I'll explain. That's one way, but there is other ways. So what I did was I get a bit of artwork, which is going to be my water, my whale. I'm going to put that behind the whatever that's called. Right, so I've got that. I can make a new layer. I could fill that layer with a blue color. And then I could change the blending mode. So this layer here, this blue layer, this is our blending modes. And I can change it to say, okay, well, I'll make it so that the color value applies to the layer below. There's a bunch of reasons why that's good and there's a bunch of reasons why that's bad. This method is really tricky and it's a bit of a pain in the butt because what you generally end up doing is you end up doing one for color and you might do one for multiply and you'll have to bring that one down so that it looks okay, and then you might add a couple more and you end up stacking up all these layers. And it's kind of a pain in the guts. It's just that layer I'm applying. So what's happening is I'm applying a setting. So I'm saying this layer, think of it like transparency. I'm saying that this layer is 50% transparent, but instead I'm saying this layer, I want you to multiply whatever is underneath it that I can see. So like imagine you holding up a sheet of cellophane, blue cellophane, and it would colour anything underneath it. But the fact that the cellophane is transparent and blue is the thing that's making it the stuff underneath that colour, not any of the settings of the layers below. So they just affect whatever it's sitting on top of. Now, if you remember before, you know how I said that if we're doing Photoshop trickery, it's really good to have shades of grey? Do you remember that? I'm now going to explain why that's good. We can do non-destructive editing in Photoshop. That means that instead of kind of doing all this mucking around or even filling this and then kind of flattening it and kind of doing all sorts of stuff, what I can do is I can take this really nice poo brown texture thing that we've got going on here and I can extract that texture out of it. I don't care about the brown and the yellow. All I want is that nice texture that it's got. So what I can do is I can desaturate that layer. So I can just do an adjustment. Once again, I'm getting ruined by my lack of... So I've just converted that layer to black and white. That's important, and I'll explain. Now I can just copy what's on that layer. I'm going to go to this layer here, and I'm going to make it a different colour, something nice, ish. Oops. I'll turn off all my... And what I'm going to do, I'm going to use this nice, I'm going to use this pattern, but I'm only actually using the black and white values to reveal some information, and I'll explain now. So what I'm going to do is I've got this layer here, this light blue. I'm going to punch a whole bunch of holes in that light blue layer. And so the way that I can do that is I go down here to my adjustment layers and I add a layer mask. And then in this layer mask, which is here, I'm going to paste in my artwork. And do you see what happens there now? So I'll just stop for a second because I think it's important to kind of, I'll do the demo again, but I'll just stop for a second. I think it's important to understand why this works so well. Where we've got colour, when we've got shades of grey, we can blend part of the colour. Where we've got black, it blocks out the colour. Where we've got white, it shows through the colour. And so the difference is by using shades of grey for our masking, we end up with this much more organic looking texture. It looks a lot more nice than instead of doing what we were doing before, which is where we were just multiplying up the colour. You can still use this method, so I can then duplicate this layer and then change some blending modes, or I could go, into this, I can invert it, and then pick another colour. Actually, I won't invert it, I will just pick another colour. Actually, I'll pick a really contrasty colour so you can see it. Then I can go into here. Can you see how that looks like it's been painted, not that it's been just kind of photoshopped and faked up? Have you ever been really frustrated? I just realised I'm supposed to be near the microphone. Have you ever been really frustrated when you're trying to like make something up in Photoshop and it just looks really flat and crap, not like a real painting? That method is the way that you get some real kind of detail and energy and kind of life out of, like that was a real crappy phone photo of just something that I splattered down on some paper. Can you see how well that works? So I'm going to just do that demo again because I think it's kind of worth doing it for you. So, and I'll do it from scratch because I think that would probably be helpful. So I'm going to pick a different texture. That's kind of nice. All right, we'll use this one. So, same thing as before. I'm going to crop it down. I can adjust out some of that background if I want. I think I'm going to find it a lot easier if I make it grey, so I'm going to do that. In this one, it doesn't matter if I've got some bits of white showing through. If I was planning to put it into Illustrator, sorry, my little highlighter is the wrong colour to show you here. If I was planning to put this in Illustrator, I might make it so it's solid black there, but I'm not. I'm planning to use this. So when I see that grey scale in there, that's rad. That's a really good sign for what I'm planning to do with it. Yeah, I'd set it. It doesn't actually have one, so I set it. There's a lot of stuff. If you are doing this regularly, the best thing you can do is start not only learning the shortcuts, but if you're doing it all the time, start making up shortcuts and then adding them to the software. Grayscale, CMYK, RGB mode, lab color mode, they're all keyboard shortcuts I've got set up to make my life easier. All right, so we've got a bit of, that's kind of cool. We'll just go with that for now. I don't want to kind of get too obsessed with it. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to go back into our little bit of artwork that we're working on. Doing crop. I'm going to paste that in. Now I need a colour to reveal through this, so I'm just going to use a blue again because that'll do. There's my bit of artwork that I pasted in. That guy there. I'm just going to make it the size of what we're working on. I might make it, that'll kind of work better if I do it that way. I want it to be sort of there-ish, that would work better. So now I can just copy that. So the only thing I'm using this grey artwork for is just, I'm using that as a texture or as a tool. I'm not using it because I'm trying to like make that exactly the thing, and you've got to be kind of prepared when you do this that sometimes it might not work like you're expecting. You might have to try a few times to get it right. So I'm going to just copy that. I'm going to go to my blue layer. I'm going to add in my layer mask. So I'm clicking down here on the layer mask. And then I've already got, if you have a look here, it's already telling me that it's selected because it's got that, see, it's got that little frame around it. I just paste it in. Yeah, but it doesn't do it because sometimes it doesn't. And now I need to add another blue layer because I forgot to add a second blue because otherwise it's going to look a little bit shitty. And there's my second blue. So what's happening here, can you see where the dark, see whether I can get us in a kind of a good spot for us, a zoomy situation. That dark kind of U shape of our swoosh, that is showing the color below it. Can you see that's the light blue that I put in there? And the white that you see there is showing the dark blue of the layer above. You can layer these up really effectively as well. So if you do lots of these, I think it'd be easy just to do on the, oh, actually I should have it on, hang on. It's not on this machine, hang on. The way that this drop-off effect is achieved here is the same method, except I'm revealing through to white. But what I've got is I've got same thing, I made some brushes, but I've layered them up. So it's a little bit hard to tell in some of these. But see how there's kind of like different layers of color being revealed of the original photo? Because this is non-destructive, I set up a template and I made 5 different variations of this ink wash effect. And then I can just drop in different pictures and pick whichever works nicest. So same goes for here. If I was to grab a, these will be crap, but that's okay. That one's actually quite nice. Oh, come on, just let me. You used to be able to just go view original from here. you see what happens there? It's just being revealed through my masking. Now, there's a bit of a clash in the styles here that I don't think super works well, but you could dial it back. You could have a little bit less and maybe it works a bit more like that. What your task, I'll talk about your task in a second. I just think, is there any questions about that process? Probably a lot. What I'm going to do is we'll break up into some workshop time and give you guys some time to try that out and to have a muck around with your files. I'm going to make a copy of this as a video, so if you want to revisit it, you can later. With anything like this, it's a bit technical. I try and make a video. I don't do them every time, so sorry, try to. So you've got a resource so you can check it out later. So I'll post the link to Slack, but I need to revisit Canvas myself probably next Wednesday. Let's see. All right, so I'll pause the video now.